Welcome back to the shop. This is going to be the second part of this series on these iron planes. But at the end of the last video, I had a little mishap. I owned one of these things on the tripod that hold the camera. Well, this broke off, so I did this little rig here, and then that wouldn't stay straight. So I took a block of wood and I cut a groove in it, the thickness of my phone, and I put my iPhone on the block of wood and I screwed the block of the wood to the tripod. So until I can find a better system, I hope this doesn't look too bad. The angle, I had to change the angle so the lens is on the other side, so I'll have to check and see what this looks like. Anyway, let's get back to the tools. So we touched on a few planes already, and we spent quite a bit on the 78s. And there was something that I did not notice when I was showing you the 78s. And that is that handle that we talked about, the hollow handle, iron handle, changed after a certain period. I'm going to bring up two of them to show you, but the earlier plane has this tab, has this you see this top part here, and then this part that comes out here. So that's the earlier handle. But then I discovered, I just didn't think about it, that the handle changed, and the bottom of the handle, let me see if I can get both of these in here. You see that has the two there. That only has one. It doesn't have the wing at the top. And the shape underneath the handle, you see how that goes up in a curve? And this one here doesn't. So that's a change that I noticed after doing that other video. But what made me notice it was I was comparing the next one in chronological order, which was going to be this plane right here, the 180 series of RABBET planes. Now, when I looked at it, I was wondering why this plane even existed. And I'll explain it to you now, why I even wondered about that. I was starting to do a description of the 180 series. Now, unfortunately, these RABBET planes came in different sizes, and I only own this one, which is the 182. In the 190 series, which is similar, those I have a couple of different sizes. So the 182s, let me explain this. There's a 180 series of RABBET planes. In this case, both sides are ground flat. Plane can be either used right or left-handed, and later catalogs showed a dappled pattern on the cast handle, and that's that dappled pattern that we have here. But you notice this has two wings, top and bottom. On the 78s, when it gets into the dappled pattern, it's not having that bottom one anymore. So there's something that's changed in the timeline of these that we have to pay attention to and try to figure out. But that's just a part of the mystery. The second part of the mystery is when I started looking at the 190 series. 180 series, 190 series. Both of them are RABBET planes, both of them are iron. The descriptions of them are exactly the same. And that's what's strange and why I'm wondering why one of these exists. So let me show you some close-ups of these planes. Here you are, looking at a 182. Now I'm going to go to the book just to point out these things to you. But there are little things about this plane that are interesting. First of all, you notice there's no hole here, which on the 78s, they have holes here threaded for the fence. This is not a FILLETSER plane. This is purely a RABBET plane, so there is no hole for a fence. Now, on the bottom of it, there is an iron that is perpendicular to the sole of the plane. It's not skewed. So this plane is intended to go with the grain as you're using it. On the opposite side, right here you see, there is a depth stop and there is right here, hidden under here, I'll have to move this to get it out of the way so you can see it. Here is a spur or a slitter, and this is the Bodmer patent for this here. I've got it turned around so nothing's sticking out because I'm not using it for going across the grain. But if you use this across the grain, you don't have the advantage of the skew cutter. You're just doing it flat across, right against, perpendicular to your grain of the wood. So, at any rate, here's the plane, and if you notice, it's got the wings on the bottom and the wings at the top. It's got this dappled texture here, very clean. No writing here, nothing about Stanley in here or anything. Again, the depth stop, but no fence, and it's a fairly plain. Now, the width of this one here is 1 inch, and in the 190 series, the 180 is one size, and the alternative number matching it is the same. So 190 and 180 would be the same width. But the difference between the 190, the 191, and the 192 are the widths of the plane. Everything else stays the same. So to show you this, I'm going to show you another plane. Note now the bottom of this is off. Now it says Stanley in here. But I have the depth gauge off of this. I have the depth gauge off of this right now. But it's virtually the same plane, the same body, 8 inches long. And the width of the cutter is 1 inch, which is the same as this one. Now, this is a 192. This is a 182. Virtually the same plane as far as I can tell, and that made me think maybe the difference between the 190 series and the 180 series was the bottom of this handle, and that made me go back and check my 78s, and that's how I discovered that discrepancy in the base of the handle and how that's changed. Now, they may have changed that just to get away from Justice Trout's patent and go with a different design so they didn't have to worry about paying on that patent. I don't know. This is a guess to me, or it may be that this was easier to cast. Again, I don't know. So let me get back to the 180 series. So this plane came out in 1886, the one that we're looking at, but this is not the earliest version. So there was an earlier version of this that perhaps looked different, but it's interesting that I do know that the 180 originally would have had that little scroll work in here, which we don't have. But it started off being offered in 1886 and 8 inches long. And this is the 182, so the width of this cutter is 1 inch. The 180 was 1.5 inches, and the 181 was 1.25 inches. So they were getting lower. The higher the number of the plane, the lower the width of the iron. Both sides are ground flat, and the plane can be either used right-handed or left-handed. So these planes, the 180 series that I'm talking about, only went through 1918. Now, why they stopped this in 1918, I don't know, because the 190s also started in the same year this does, but they continued making the 190 series all the way through 1962. But virtually the same plane as far as I can tell. Quickly, I want to go over and talk about the way that the 78 blade is held in place. And you see here, it has this lever cap, and you see the shape of the lever cap. The reason for that is because in order to make this into a true rabbet plane, the iron has to go from one side of the sole all the way to the other. So the shape of the iron itself is also a little out of balance due to the structure to hold the iron in place. Here's a little shot of the 78 iron logo. And so this goes in to that hole, and then you hold it in place and you put the lever cap on. And then you push that down, you tighten this, and by tightening this here, you're applying pressure here. Sort of a pivot like that. And that's what holds your iron in place. And again, you have to set it manually, either by tapping it or moving it gently and then tightening up. So that's the 78. But when they got to the 180 series, they did something different. So this is a change in the design. You see there's a bolt that goes into the main body here, and that can be tightened or loosened to keep it from wiggling back and forth this way. But so when you loosen this, this doesn't come off. This just pivots up, loosens out, and then you pull the iron out sideways. And you can see again, the iron is wider on this part here than this because the iron has to go all the way through for the thickness of the sole, and you need this main support here to keep the plane together. Then when you tighten this up, you're pivoting at this point. Instead of having that screw or bolt going through that you're going up against, this is fixed. And then you have to reset your iron laterally and depth-wise. But this is a new addition, this pivot point here, and how this works. And it's continued from the 180 series into the 190. So again, another similarity between the two. So here's the 182. I'm going to get it set up and do a little work with it. I don't know if it'll be helpful to you guys or not, but I'm going to go ahead and try to put this in here so you can see how I set the blade in. You see I slid the blade in like that, and then I finger tighten this, not terribly tight. Now what I'm going to do is I'm going to sight down the plane and see how much of the iron is sticking up, and set it by eye. And I'm going to adjust here. I'm feeling on this side here that the iron is a little more than flush, and the same thing on the other side with my other finger. So I'm keeping it in line and then loosely tightening this. Now I'll sight down the plane and put it against something light so I can see whether it's got any cut at all. And now I'm going to move it down just a hair and retighten it and go again and resight. And I can see that one side over here isn't out enough. So I'm going to adjust laterally this way and then check to make sure that the iron is parallel. And you can see that this takes a little bit of time in doing to get it just right. That looks pretty good to me. You probably can't see it, but it's just sticking up a hair here. And so we're going to try it out on the wood and see how it goes. So I think I might have it set a little heavy, but not too bad. The distance from the front to the iron is the same as on the 78 and the 190s. Again, this is the 180. So there I'm using it on the top of that to take a shaving. But it is a rabbet plane, and here you see we have a rebate. And so I'm going to pull it down and just go down that rebate this way. And I'm deepening it in this way. And then I'm going to take this and I'm going to turn it sideways, which is a nice thing about this. If this line was not nice and straight, the shoulder, I could take the iron and I could set it up here and come down this way and clean up that shoulder. Now, I've got a really nice 90-degree rabbet right there using this plane here, the 182. Now, this is the 182, and I'm going to take out the 192. There's not a lot of difference in them. The time periods are a little different. You can notice that in this handle here, this scale is outlined by this line, whereas this modeled one just sort of wraps around and goes behind and on the other side. The change in the handle is here. You can see the difference. So this is older, this is newer. 182, and this one is the 192. So the thickness of them is the same, virtually the same. So let's go into the 192 and see anything else. The pivot is the same. It's 1 inch wide. It's got the same Bodmer spur. Everything's the same as far as I can tell. So I have not figured out why the need for these two different number groups. So this is the 192. And let me pull from here. This is the 191. So the 191 is older, and Stanley is not in here. And this is a single patch here with the Stanley logo in it. And this one has the 2, similar to this same period. But this is the 191, and that means that it's wider. There you can see the difference. Other than that, 191, 192. The number 39 Dado plane was the next all-iron plane to come out in 1902. Unlike the 191 or the 190 series and the 180 series, where the sizes changed according to the larger number, so if it was 180 or 181 or 182, these only had one number, 39, and it was usually assigned the increments of width of the iron would be added to it. So you would buy a 39 1/4, 39 3/8. And they had 8 different sizes. The 8 different sizes went from 1/4 inch up to 1 inch. This is a type 1 number 39 Dado plane, and I'm going to bring in some close-up shots of it because they've got some things on this that are a little different than what they had earlier. In particular, the knickers really stand out, or the spurs, as we sometimes call them. So let's get in a little closer, and I'll show you some things about it. So here it is, the number 39, and again, we have a discrepancy between John Walter's book and Alvin Sellen's book. The Alvin Sellen says that this plane was available from 1902 on, but John Walter says that it was manufactured from 1900. And all the way up until 1953. So there's a little discrepancy there. They also did some changes. This is a type 1, that is, of the number 39. And there are certain things that are very specific to this plane, being a type 1. The number 39 inside this little oval here and the 3/4 inch size here wasn't on all of them, and it changes later. The other thing to take note of is this handle. This is that one that I showed you that was different with the inset. Now, the Type 1 actually has the patent date right here. But if you look closely at this one, this does not have the patent date. This has the patent applied for. Patent applied for, which means that this predated the number 1. That's mentioned in the book. I've never seen another one of these ever anywhere else. So I think this is probably a very hard plane to come by, according to this book. Now, as I say, things changed on it, and they went through different changes as far as the different sizes, and there were a lot of modifications. The Type 1, they're talking about this part. The Type 2 has the same casting, but it no longer has this older style knob. And then the Type 3, they changed something else. Let me show you this older style knob. You saw that on the 78 too, and these are the earliest knobs that you'll find on them. 3/4 inch wide and a skewed cutter. So this is the difference, that this is a Dado plane, and it's specifically made to cut across the grain. You'll notice there's no depth stop on this side here. The depth stop is only on this side, but it does include it. There's no fence because this is not a Phillister. So there's no fence to control where you're putting it in, so you have to modify and use your own fence, as you'll see in the example that I'll do. The spur, though, is interesting. You see this long piece here, and is a long shaft through here, and this is inlaid in there with 2 screws, and then the other one on the other side is right here, a screw and a screw. Here are the slitters on the spurs, and they should be flat on this side and beveled on the inside so that the cutting edge is right along this line. Some of them have been sharpened on both sides or on the wrong sides, so when you're finding these, always look at these to see if you can still resharpen them back to the way they should be, because you want that cutting edge all the way on the furthest most outside of the sole. Now, here is the depth stop, and the depth stop is interesting because it has a micro adjust. You can turn this and move it down just ever so slightly or as much as you want.
See, there's a coarse thread there and a finer thread there, and that's what makes this function. This thread here is feeding in this bar here, part of the body, and then the other part is moving the depth stop up and down. And then there is this to lock that off once you have it set, but you have a form of a micro adjustment there.
Similar as the 190 and the 180 series, with this lever cap that pivots and is mounted to the piece. On this side it says Stanley, and this is inset and cast, so this is that other handle that I was talking about that's different than those other ones. So let's take a look at how it works. I've set the 2 cutters on each side to a mild depth. See, there's the skewed iron there, and set up the depth stop, and I've applied a fence to the side of this. Now the grain on this wood here is going this way, as it should, and that's the reason for that skewed iron, is that I'm cutting across the grain. So I'm just using this fence to get me a start, and you can see it's cutting. I'm not applying a lot of force. My knuckle's hitting this right now, so that's kind of a pain, but I'm starting to get a ridge here and a ridge here, and you can see that there's not a lot of tear out along this line here, and that's due to these 2 slitters on each side. So still fairly clean on each side. I've moved it down for a deeper cut. This one is really bothering me, so I'm going to move it the opposite direction and put it underneath so it's out of. And let's try it again without that sticking up. I did some corrective moving of the iron laterally, and that has really cleaned up that inside line a great deal. And now I find I can go right up against that fence and take a nice clean cut, and I'm getting nice clean walls to this dado. Bit of work setting it up. A couple of nicks on my hand from that thing, but we're okay. And then the depth stop is not quite there yet, but very close, and I can feel it wanting to stop the cut, so we're there. So the left side of this is a little bit ragged, and I think that I can refile those knickers on each side, or slitters, and get a cleaner cut. But here on this side you can see that it's doing a fair job, And now that I'm down to that wall, I shouldn't need to have that fence, and I can even out the dado to where it's the same depth all the way through. So that made a pretty nice 3/4 inch dado, and it just took a little more tuning up. It's still heavy here and light here, so we need to come back here and just staying straight with the fence. Try to stay even and start the cut a little bit earlier. And there it is, it's going down, and it's going to be pretty flat. Looks good, and it's nice. I think it's very good. So one little addition here in the John Walters book on this plane, they're still referring to these spurs as Bodmer's patent. But as you remember, on these other ones, the spurs on them were a different style, and those were referred to as Bodmer's patent. So perhaps he came up with these after that and decided this is the new way to go. I don't know. I don't really have an answer to it, but it's interesting how many different things there are about these planes. The important part about this one is that it's got the skewed cutter, and it's got that micro adjustment, and it worked really well, but it did take quite a bit of tuning up and adjusting that iron left to right so that I got an even bite on it as I went through that wood. But it gave me a nice dado. So that's it for now. We're going to stop at the 39, but there are more to go, so there'll be at least another portion of this series, and I'm looking forward to it. I'm glad you guys stayed and watched the second part of this series, and I hope you enjoyed it. And until the next one, until I see you again, take care of yourselves and be kind to everyone you see. Take care.